The mop hit the floor at 3:47 hours, and Marcus Webb didn't bother picking it up. 23 years cleaning hangars had taught him when to recognize the sound of men running like death itself was chasing them. Through the reinforced glass of Hangar 7, he watched figures in flight suits sprint across the tarmac, their boots hammering concrete in a rhythm that spoke of controlled panic. He'd seen scrambles before. This wasn't a scramble. This was something else entirely. The base-wide intercom crackled to life with a sound he'd never heard in 2 decades of night shifts, the installation commander's voice, raw and unfiltered. All personnel, code black. Locate Marcus Webb, civilian contractor, last seen Hangar 7. This is not a drill. Webb, if you're hearing this, stay exactly where you are. Marcus felt his chest tighten. His daughter's medical bills were paid. His record was clean. He'd never missed a shift, never touched anything he wasn't supposed to touch. But the way those officers were moving, the way their hands hovered near sidearms, told him this wasn't about his work performance. Through the hangar's massive opening, an A-10 Thunderbolt II sat like a scarred beast, its twin engines still ticking as they cooled. Someone had landed it 30 minutes ago, hard and fast, the kind of landing that left rubber streaked across runway markers. He'd seen the pilot climb out, helmet tucked under one arm, moving with the careful precision of someone keeping themselves together through sheer will, shorter than he'd expected. Quieter, too. The hangar door burst open. 3 officers, led by a colonel whose name tape read MORRSON, moved toward him with faces carved from stone. "Mr. Webb, we need to know exactly what you saw in the last hour." Marcus's hands were still wet from the mop bucket. "I saw a pilot land, that's all. Did my job, stayed out of the way like always." Morrison exchanged glances with the others. "The pilot say anything to you?" "No, sir. Just walked past, headed toward debriefing, I figure." "You see her face?" "Briefly." "Why?" Morrison's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "Because that pilot just saved 600 Marines and an entire strike package from a massacre. And according to every system we have, according to every record and roster, that pilot doesn't exist." The words hung in the air like cordite. Marcus remembered the way the pilot had moved, that controlled, empty calm of someone who'd just done something they couldn't take back. "What do you mean doesn't exist?" Morrison pulled out a tablet, his fingers moving across the screen. "Flight logs show the aircraft landing itself. Tower recordings captured no radio communications. Gun camera footage is encrypted beyond anything we've ever seen. And the pilot who just walked through your hangar." He turned the screen around. It showed nothing but static where a personnel file should be. Every database lists her as KIA 3 years ago, in a crash that left no survivors. Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. Then who the hell did I just see? The colonel's voice dropped to something approaching reverence. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Because 6 hours ago, someone launched from this base in an A-10 that was scheduled for decommissioning. No flight plan, no authorization, just went wheels up into a night that was supposed to be quiet. And then she flew into hell itself." Morrison gestured toward the aircraft sitting silent in the hangar. Its nose art was barely visible under layers of carbon scoring and hydraulic fluid, a raven's wing, painted in silver that had once gleamed. "That's the Revenant," Morrison said quietly. "And the woman who flies it was the best close air support pilot the Air Force ever produced. Her call sign was Ember. Real name, Captain Diana Korchenko. And officially she's been dead since 2022. Marcus looked at the A-10, really looked at it. The aircraft wore its scars like a testament, every panel dinged and patched, every surface speaking of missions that should have been impossible. If she's dead, then what was flying that thing? Morrison's expression held something between awe and fear. Something that just rewrote everything we thought we knew about air combat. 6 hours ago, SEAL Team 3 walked into an ambush in the Panjshir Valley. 35 operators surrounded by 300 hostiles in terrain that makes air support nearly impossible. Mountains on 3 sides, SAM sites covering every approach vector, weather below minimums. Every pilot we asked said the mission was suicide. He pulled up another screen. Someone launched anyway, someone who apparently didn't care that the odds were impossible. The tower tried to stop her. She cut communications, just went dark and flew straight into the worst kill box we've seen in 15 years. Marcus felt his hands trembling. And the SEALs? All 35 are alive. The hostiles aren't. 287 confirmed KIA, the rest scattered to the wind. And according to the team leader's report, it was one aircraft, one pilot. Flying patterns that shouldn't be possible, hitting targets through weather that should have been impenetrable. He said it was like watching an angel of death that knew exactly where every enemy was before they moved. Morrison's voice carried weight that spoke of too many years seeing too much. The team called for emergency CAS. What they got was a ghost who flew like she'd been waiting 3 years for exactly this mission. Marcus thought about the pilot's face, what little he'd seen of it, younger than he'd expected, eyes that held distances no amount of time could measure. Why'd she do it? Why come back after 3 years? The colonel looked toward the A-10, and something in his expression shifted. That's the question that's tearing this base apart. Because whatever her reasons, she just proved that everything we thought about limits was wrong. And now she's somewhere on this installation, and every system we have can't find her. It's like she's a ghost in our own house. One of the other officers, a major whose name tape read Harrison, stepped forward. Mr. Webb, in the next few hours, people are going to start asking questions, the kind that come from very high up. What we need to know is simple. Did she seem injured, disoriented, dangerous? Marcus remembered the way Captain Korchenko had walked, that careful, measured stride of someone holding themselves together through training and will alone. She seemed tired, he said finally. The kind of tired that comes from carrying weight nobody else can see, but dangerous. No, she moved like someone who just finished something they needed to finish, like maybe she could finally rest. Morrison nodded slowly. That's what worries me, because heroes don't usually survive their redemption. He gestured toward the door. Come with us. Command wants to debrief anyone who had contact. And Webb, Marcus turned. Sir, what you saw stays quiet, not because we're hiding anything, but because right now there are people who want to turn this into either a scandal or a supernatural story. What it really is, that's something we need time to understand. They walked across the tarmac together, past aircraft in various states of readiness, past crews who worked through the night keeping America's edge sharp. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the dramas of humans and their wars. In the distance, dawn was beginning to touch the eastern mountains, painting them in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere on this base, a pilot who was supposed to be dead was sitting in darkness, living with whatever memories drove her back from the grave. And 600 Marines scattered across Afghanistan were breathing air they shouldn't be breathing, walking on legs that should have been still, because someone decided that impossible was just another word for difficult. Marcus thought about his daughter, about the medical bills that kept him working nights at his age, about all the invisible people who kept the machine running while others got the glory. He thought about a pilot who came back from death to save people she'd never meet, whose names she'd never know. Sir, he said quietly, whatever she is, whatever she did, she's a hero. That much I know. Morrison didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many heroes die. Heroes are easy, Mr. Webb. It's the haunted ones who scare me, because they're the ones who don't know when to stop fighting, and sometimes they take everyone else down with them. They reached the command building as the first light of dawn broke across the base. Inside, in rooms filled with screens and secure communications, the United States Air Force was about to begin asking questions that had no easy answers. But Marcus Webb, janitor and single father, knew something they'd take hours to figure out. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't an enemy with guns. It was a person who'd already lost everything and found something worth dying for again. And Captain Diana Korchenko, call sign Ember, had just reminded everyone what that looked like. The briefing room smelled of coffee gone bitter and tension stretched thin. Commander Morrison stood at the head of a table, surrounded by officers whose ranks spoke of authority that usually remained invisible. A Major General Marcus didn't recognize sat with fingers steepled. his eyes carrying the flat assessment of someone who'd ordered men into death and learned to sleep afterward. "Let's be clear about what we know," the general said, his voice carrying the Texas drawl that Defense Appropriations Committees found trustworthy. At 21:47 hours yesterday, an A-10C departed this installation without authorization, flight plan, or communication. The aircraft in question, tail number 800247, was scheduled for decommissioning. It should have been non-operational. He pulled up a holographic display that filled the center of the table. The A-10 rotated slowly, each damaged panel highlighted in amber. "This aircraft has 1,900 combat hours. It's been hit by small arms fire 63 times, surface-to-air missiles twice, and once by what we believe was a rocket-propelled grenade that somehow failed to detonate. By every metric, it should be in a museum or a scrapyard." Morrison cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, that aircraft is in better mechanical condition than some of our active fleet. Someone's been maintaining it off the books." The general's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "We've been running diagnostics since it landed. The engines are rebuilt, running at 112% efficiency. The avionics are upgraded beyond current operational standards. The GAU-8 has been rebarreled and modified for improved accuracy. Someone put thousands of hours and considerable expertise into keeping this aircraft not just operational, but superior." A colonel whose name tape read REEVES leaned forward. "Who had access?" Morrison gestured to an aide who pulled up maintenance records. "According to official logs, no one. The aircraft was moved to the boneyard at Davis-Monthan 2 years ago, except—" He paused, and Marcus watched the weight of realization cross his face. "Except it never actually arrived. Transfer paperwork shows completion, but the aircraft itself was never checked into Davis-Monthan's inventory." The room went silent. Marcus, sitting in a corner chair because no one had told him to leave, understood what they were realizing. Someone had made an A-10 disappear from the Air Force's inventory and had been maintaining it in secret for years. "That requires serious resources," the general said quietly. "Hangar space, parts, expertise. You don't hide a combat aircraft without help." Reeves pulled up another screen. "We've been running personnel checks, looking for anyone with the skill set and access. The list is shorter than you'd think. We need someone with intimate knowledge of A-10 systems, authorization to access secure facilities, and a reason to keep this quiet." Morrison's voice was careful. "Or we need someone who doesn't care about authorization anymore. Someone who knows how to move through military systems like a ghost because they helped build those systems." The general's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting Captain Korchenko had inside help, someone who knew she was alive and decided to keep it quiet." "I'm suggesting that a pilot doesn't survive a crash that officially killed her, maintain a combat aircraft for 3 years, and then launch unauthorized into a hostile zone without serious support. The question is who and why." Marcus raised his hand slightly, feeling absurd doing it in a room full of field-grade officers. To his surprise, the general nodded. "Mr. Webb, you have something. I just clean hangars, sir, but I've been doing it for 23 years and I know when something's different. I've seen it before." The room's attention swung toward him like a weapon being aimed. Morrison leaned forward. "Explain." Marcus felt sweat form on his palms. "About 8 months ago, maybe 9, I was cleaning Hangar 12, the one we use for long-term storage. I saw an A-10 that didn't match the tail numbers on my checklist. I figured it was a paperwork error, you know how it goes, but I remember thinking it was in too good condition for a decommissioned bird." The general exchanged glances with Morrison. "You report it." "No, sir. Like I said, figured it was paperwork. And honestly, I've learned that asking too many questions about things above my pay grade is a good way to lose my clearance. I've got a daughter with medical bills. I can't afford to be curious." Morrison stood, moving to a map of the base displayed on the far wall. "Hangar 12 has been listed as containing surplus equipment for 2 years. No active maintenance crew, no regular inspections. Just another building on a base with 300 buildings." He turned back to the table. "It's the perfect hiding place. Bureaucratic enough to be ignored, secure enough to require clearance. Eves was already typing, pulling access logs for Hangar 12 now, looking for patterns. The screen filled with data, timestamps, and badge numbers scrolling past. Marcus watched the officers lean in, their trained eyes finding patterns he couldn't see. There, Reeves said, highlighting a series of entries. Someone accessed that hangar every Tuesday and Thursday night for the last 18 months, always between 2300 and 400 hours, always using a maintenance supervisor credential. Morrison's face went pale. Pull up the badge owner. The screen shifted. Marcus saw the photo before the name registered. The man was in his late 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that held the weight of too many deployments. The name beneath read, Chief Master Sergeant Thomas Alvarez, Maintenance Operations. Jesus, Morrison breathed. Chief Alvarez has been on this base for 32 years. He's 2 months from retirement. If anyone knows how to make things invisible in the system, it's him. The general's expression had gone from curious to dangerous. Where is he now? On leave, sir. Terminal leave. He's been off base for 3 weeks. Morrison pulled out his phone. I'll have security forces pick him up. The general raised a hand. Belay that. If Chief Alvarez has been protecting Captain Korchenko for 3 years, dragging him in like a criminal isn't going to get us answers. It's going to get us lawyers and silence. He stood, and everyone in the room instinctively straightened. Morrison, you and I are going to pay the chief a visit. Quietly. We're going to have a conversation about loyalty, about ghosts, and about what exactly he's been protecting. Reeves, I want every piece of data on Captain Korchenko's original crash. Something about that incident didn't add up then, and I want to know what we missed. He turned toward Marcus. Mr. Webb, you've been helpful, but from this moment forward, everything you've heard is classified. You tell no one, not your daughter, not your priest, not your own conscience. Clear? Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. Good, because what we're looking at isn't just an unauthorized flight. It's proof that someone in our own house decided the rules didn't apply. And depending on their reasons, that's either the worst kind of treason or the best kind of loyalty. Either way, it's going to tear this base apart when the truth comes out. The officers filed out, leaving Marcus alone in the briefing room. Through the windows, he could see the base coming to life with morning shift change, the normal rhythm of military life continuing as if the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. He thought about Chief Alvarez, a man 2 months from retirement who'd spent 3 years protecting a ghost. He thought about Captain Korchenko, officially dead, who'd launched into impossible odds to save men she'd never met. And he thought about his own daughter, about the way she looked at him like he was a hero just for showing up every day with clean uniforms and paid bills. Sometimes being a hero wasn't about glory. Sometimes it was about showing up in the dark, doing the work nobody saw, keeping faith with people who needed you even when the world said you should walk away. Marcus picked up his mop bucket and headed back toward Hangar 7. Someone had to clean up the hydraulic fluid. Someone had to keep the floors ready for the next pilot, the next mission, the next impossible thing that needed doing. He'd been doing it for 23 years. He'd do it for 23 more if that's what it took, because that's what invisible people did. They kept the machine running while heroes got the headlines. Chief Master Sergeant Thomas Alvarez lived in a modest ranch house 40 minutes from base, the kind of place where retired sergeants went to pretend they'd left the service behind. Commander Morrison and the general arrived in an unmarked sedan, the early morning sun painting the desert landscape in shades of copper and rust. The chief was in his garage, working on a 1967 Mustang with the kind of focused attention mechanics brought to anything with moving parts. He didn't look up when they approached. Wondered how long it would take, he said, his voice carrying the rasp of 30 years breathing jet fuel and desert dust. Coffee's inside if you want it, otherwise say what you came to say. The general stepped forward. Chief Alvarez, I know who you are, sir. Question is, do you know why you're here? Morrison felt his jaw tight. The chief's tone wasn't insubordinate, but it carried the weight of someone who'd stopped caring about consequences. We're here because an A-10 that should be in a boneyard launched from our base last night. An A-10 you've been maintaining in secret. An A-10 flown by a pilot we buried 3 years ago. Alvarez finally looked up, his eyes meeting Morrison's without flinching. You didn't bury her. You buried an empty casket and called it closure. Big difference. The general's voice went cold. Explain now. The chief set down his wrench with deliberate care. 3 years ago, Captain Diana Korchenko flew a combat mission in Syria, close air support for a Marine reconnaissance unit that got compromised. She was on station for 3 hours, past bingo fuel, past every safety margin. She kept the enemy off those Marines until an extraction bird could get them out. All 19 Marines survived. He stood, wiping oil from his hands. On her return flight, she took a hit. SAM fragment clipped her hydraulics. She managed to nurse that A-10 across 200 miles of hostile territory before the systems failed completely. She ejected over the Mediterranean. By the time combat search and rescue got there, they found her chute and debris. They searched for 3 days. Never found a body. Morrison felt something cold settle in his chest. But she survived. She survived, washed up on a beach in Turkey, half dead from exposure. A fishing family found her, kept her alive. By the time she was coherent enough to contact us, she'd been declared KIA. Memorial service was already scheduled. The general's expression hadn't softened, and instead of coming back, she chose to stay dead. Alvarez's laugh was bitter. She tried to come back, made contact through secure channels, asked for extraction, debriefing, everything by the book. You know what she got? He pulled out a tablet, bringing up a document marked with classification headers Marcus couldn't even pronounce. She got this. Orders from someone so far up the chain you'd need oxygen to meet them. Orders that said her return would compromise ongoing operations, that her sacrifice had been valuable, that she needed to stay buried. Morrison read the document, feeling his world shift. The orders were real, signed by authorities he couldn't question. But the words beneath the bureaucracy were clear. Captain Korchenko had been too effective, too visible. Her survival would raise questions about why she'd been left out there so long. So they'd chosen to keep her dead. That's when she contacted me, Alvarez said quietly. Because she knew I'd helped maintain her bird through 2 deployments. Knew I'd understand what it meant to be thrown away after you'd given everything. The general's face was stone. So you helped her disappear, used your access to hide an aircraft, maintain it off the books, committed conspiracy, theft, fratricide of records. I committed loyalty, sir, something the Air Force used to value before it became another corporation worried about optics. The chief's voice carried no anger, just exhausted truth. Diana Korchenko saved 19 Marines. She flew missions that should have killed her 6 times over. And when she needed the service she'd bled for to bring her home, they told her to stay dead because it was politically convenient. Morrison stepped between them. So you helped her maintain the A-10, kept it mission-ready. For what? Revenge, Alvarez shook his head. For purpose. For the day someone would need her again. Diana couldn't let go of being a pilot any more than I could stop being a mechanic. So we made a deal. I'd keep her bird ready. She'd stay hidden until the moment came that only she could answer. The general's voice dropped to something dangerous. And last night was that moment. Last night was 35 SEALs walking into an ambush that every other pilot said was unsurvivable. Last night was weather so bad we'd grounded everything. Last night was the kind of mission Diana Korchenko was born for. The chief met the general's eyes without backing down. So yes, sir, last night was that moment. And because I kept faith with a pilot nobody wanted, 35 men are breathing today. You tell me I was wrong. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Morrison watched the general's face, seeing the calculation happening behind those eyes. This wasn't just about regulations. It was about what happened when the rules conflicted with results. Where is she now? The general asked finally. Alvarez smiled, and it held no humor. You think I'd tell you if I knew? Diana's earned the right to choose what comes next. Maybe she disappears again. Maybe she walks into your office and demands reinstatement. Either way, it's her call, not mine. Morrison pulled out his phone. We can hold you. Conspiracy, unauthorized access, theft of government property. We can make this ugly. You can, Alvarez agreed. You can also ask yourself what happens when 35 SEALs find out you're prosecuting the man who kept their savior alive. The general held up a hand. "Stand down, Morrison." He studied the chief with eyes that had seen too many wars to be surprised by loyalty. "Chief Alvarez, you put me in an impossible position. By the book, you've committed multiple offenses. But by the spirit of what we're supposed to be, you did what I hope any of my sergeants would do. You kept faith." He turned toward the Mustang, running a hand along its primer gray fender. "I've got a 1970 Chevelle at home. Been restoring it for 12 years. You know why? Why's that, sir? Because some things are worth saving, even when everyone else says they're junk, even when it costs more than replacement, because their value isn't in the metal, it's in what they represent." The general looked back, and Morrison saw something in his expression that wasn't in any regulation. "I'm going to walk away from this garage, Chief. I'm going to put in my report that we investigated the maintenance anomaly and found administrative errors. Nothing criminal, nothing worth pursuing. But I need you to deliver a message to Captain Korchenko." Alvarez waited. "Tell her she's got 48 hours. Either she comes involuntarily for debrief, or I'll have to treat her as unauthorized personnel on a military installation. I'll give her every chance to tell her story her way. But this ends in paperwork one way or another. Ghost stories don't serve the men and women who wear the uniform." The chief nodded slowly. "And if she chooses to disappear, then I'll spend the rest of my career wondering if I made the right call. But I won't hunt her. Some debts can't be repaid with prosecution." Morrison watched the general walk back toward the sedan. The older man moved with the careful precision of someone who just made a decision that would define the last chapter of his career. "Sir," Morrison said quietly when they were out of earshot, "we're really going to let this go?" The general opened the car door. "Morrison, you've been in how long? 15 years. 17, sir. Then you remember why you joined. Probably some story about honor, service, protecting people who can't protect themselves." The general settled into the passenger seat. "Well, last night, Captain Diana Korchenko did all of that. She violated regulations, broke chain of command, flew unauthorized into hostile territory, and she saved 35 men who would have died waiting for someone to follow the rules." He looked toward the garage where Chief Alvarez had returned to his Mustang. "Sometimes the system eats its best people. Sometimes the rules meant to protect everyone end up protecting no one. And sometimes a dead woman has to rise from the grave to remind us what we're supposed to be." Morrison started the engine, his mind working through implications that would take months to fully understand. "What about the SEALs? They're going to want to know who saved them. They'll get their answers. But not from us. If Captain Korchenko wants credit, she can claim it. If she wants to disappear again, that's her right. Either way, we owe her the choice." They drove back toward the base in silence, the desert landscape scrolling past in endless variations of brown and gold. Somewhere in those mountains, or in the valleys beyond, a pilot who'd been dead for 3 years was making decisions about what came next. And 2 officers who'd sworn to uphold regulations were learning what happened when loyalty and rules pointed in different directions. Sometimes there was no right answer, just the one you could live with. The debriefing theater at Bagram Airfield held ghosts of a different kind. SEAL Team 3 sat in metal chairs, their bodies carrying bruises and bandages that spoke of a night that should have killed them. Lieutenant Commander Jake Reeves stood at the front, his left arm in a sling, addressing an audience that included officers from 3 service branches and enough brass to build a battleship. "At 22:30 hours, my team was compromised 4 clicks into our insertion," Reeves said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion carved into his face. "We had solid intel about a high-value target in the Panjshir Valley. What we didn't have was accurate information about enemy strength. Instead of 40 hostiles, we walked into 300. He pulled up a map that showed terrain so hostile it looked like the Earth itself had decided humans weren't welcome. Mountains rose like jagged teeth, valleys cut deep into rock that had never known mercy. Weather was deteriorating. Cloud ceiling dropped to 300 feet, visibility near zero. Every extract option disappeared in less than 5 minutes. We were surrounded, outgunned, and out of miracles. An Army colonel whose name tape read Bradley leaned forward. "You called for close air support. What was the response?" Reeves's expression went dark. "I called for CAS and got what I expected, nothing. Weather was below minimums for fast movers. Apache gunships couldn't operate in those valleys. AC-130s couldn't get below the clouds safely. Every pilot I talked to said the same thing: mission was no-go. We were on our own." He paused, and something in his face shifted. Then at 22:47 hours, I heard something that shouldn't have been possible: the sound of a GAU-8 Avenger cannon. For those who don't speak A-10, that's the sound of a 30mm rotary cannon that fires depleted uranium rounds at 65 per second. It sounds like God tearing the sky open. The room went silent. Everyone there knew that sound, and everyone knew what it meant. "I thought I was hallucinating," Reeves continued. "No way an A-10 was operating in that weather, in that terrain. But then I heard it again, closer this time. And through the clouds, through weather that shouldn't allow visual flight, I saw the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed in my life." He pulled up thermal footage from his team's recording equipment. The image was grainy but unmistakable: an A-10 Thunderbolt II dropping out of cloud cover at an angle that should have sent it into the mountainside. The aircraft was inverted, rolling through a high-G maneuver that brought it level barely 200 feet above the valley floor. "That's not a normal attack run," someone said from the back. Reeves smiled, and it held wonder. "No, sir, it's not. That's what's called an impossible maneuver by someone who doesn't know the meaning of the word. What you're seeing is a pilot who just rolled inverted through clouds, acquired targets visually while upside down, and reversed into a gun run that violated every safety protocol ever written." The A-10 in the footage opened fire. The GAU-8's muzzle flash lit the valley like a strobe, and through the thermal imaging they could see enemy positions disintegrate under depleted uranium that hit like the fist of an angry god. "First pass took out their machine gun nests," Reeves said. "The ones that had us pinned. Second pass walked the gun through their mortar positions. By the third pass the enemy wasn't fighting. They were running." Commander Morrison, who'd been standing in the back, stepped forward. "You got radio contact?" Reeves shook his head. "That's the strange part. No radio comms, no call sign, no request for coordinates. It was like that pilot could see through the clouds, through the night, straight into the enemy's positions. My team uses laser designators. This pilot never asked for designation, just knew." He advanced the footage. The A-10 made 7 passes through the valley, each one threading between mountains with clearances measured in meters. On the 4th pass, the aircraft took ground fire, tracers reaching up through the darkness like angry fireflies. "Right there," Reeves pointed. "See that? The pilot took hits. Multiple small arms could have broken off, should have broken off. Instead, he stopped." "Sir, you said she," Bradley interrupted. Reeves nodded slowly. "After the 7th pass, the enemy was done. 300 hostiles reduced to survivors running for their lives. The A-10 made one final run, low and slow, and as it passed overhead I saw the pilot. The canopy had taken damage and I could see inside. The pilot looked down at my position and raised 2 fingers, the peace sign, or victory, or maybe just acknowledgement." He met the colonel's eyes. "I've worked with close air support for 12 years. I've seen the best pilots the Air Force has fly missions that would make your hair white. But what I saw last night, that wasn't just skill. That was someone who'd been waiting their entire life to fly that mission. Someone who knew those mountains like they'd memorized them. Someone who didn't care about the weather or the odds because they'd already died once and figured they had nothing left to lose." Morrison felt his chest tighten. The description matched everything he'd learned about Captain Korchenko: the fearlessness born of having nothing left to lose, the skill that came from thousands of hours in an aircraft that most pilots saw as an obsolete relic. "Did you see the tail number?" Morrison asked. Reeves pulled up a closer image. The A-10's tail was partially obscured by darkness and weather, but a few numbers were visible: 800247. "That's the Revenant," Morrison said quietly. The room stirred. That designation carried weight even among people who dealt in secret operations. I thought that aircraft was decommissioned, Bradley said. Morrison chose his words carefully. It was supposed to be. Apparently someone disagreed with that assessment. Reeves continued his briefing. The pilot made no attempt to land at our position. No request for damage assessment, just climbed back into the clouds and disappeared. Last thing I heard was the sound of those engines fatting into the night. My team was alive. The enemy was scattered. And whoever that pilot was, they saved 35 men who should have been dead by dawn. He turned off the display. I don't know what the regulations say. I don't know what procedures were violated. What I know is that someone launched into conditions that should have killed them, flew through mountains that don't forgive mistakes, and engaged an enemy force that outnumbered them 300 to 1. And they won. Morrison stepped forward. Lieutenant Commander, your team is being rotated back stateside for medical evaluation. Consider yourselves on administrative leave pending investigation of the incident. Reeves's eyes narrowed. Investigation, sir. With respect, my men are alive because of that pilot. If there's an investigation, it should be pinning a medal on whoever flew that bird. Not that simple, Morrison said. The pilot who saved you is officially listed as killed in action 3 years ago. The aircraft she flew is supposed to be in a boneyard, and the mission she flew was unauthorized, unsupported, and technically impossible. So yes, there's going to be an investigation, but it's not about blame. It's about understanding how this happened and what it means. Bradley stood. Commander Morrison, what exactly are you saying? That a dead woman stole an aircraft and saved a SEAL team. I'm saying that reality is more complicated than our paperwork suggests, and sometimes the people we've written off turn out to be exactly who we needed when everything else failed. Reeves moved to stand directly in front of Morrison. Then you tell that pilot, whoever she is, wherever she is, that SEAL Team 3 owes her a debt that can't be repaid. You tell her that 35 men are going home to their families, because she decided impossible was just another word for difficult. And you tell her that if your investigation puts her at risk, those 35 men are going to have strong opinions about justice versus bureaucracy. Morrison met the SEAL's eyes and saw the kind of loyalty that made men run into fire for each other. The pilot will receive your message, one way or another. The briefing ended, officers filing out with more questions than answers. Morrison remained, studying the frozen image of the threading through mountains that should have been its grave. Somewhere, Captain Diana Korchenko was living with her own ghosts. Somewhere, she was making decisions about whether saving lives was worth revealing herself. And somewhere, 35 SEALs were learning what it meant to owe your life to a ghost. Morrison pulled out his phone and made a call to a number that didn't officially exist. Chief Alvarez answered on the second ring. She needs to know, Morrison said without preamble. Know what? That she's not alone anymore. That 35 men just went on record saying she's a hero. That whatever happens next, she's got people in her corner. There was silence on the line. Then, I'll tell her. Can't promise it'll matter. Diana stopped believing in happy endings a long time ago. Then maybe it's time someone reminded her that endings aren't written until they're over. Morrison hung up and walked out into the Afghan morning, where helicopters beat the air into submission and young men prepared for missions that would write their own impossible stories. Captain Diana Korchenko sat in a safe house 40 clicks from Bagram, in a room that smelled of dust and yesterday's regret. Her flight suit was still damp with sweat and hydraulic fluid, the name tape carefully removed, her rank insignia long since discarded. Through a window that looked toward mountains she'd flown through blind, she watched the sun paint the Hindu Kush in colors that made lies seem like truth. The television was on, volume low, showing news that didn't mention what she'd done. The world continued its rotation, indifferent to one woman's choice to rise from the grave and do what she'd been trained to do. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn, didn't reach for the sidearm that lay on the table within easy reach. She knew the sound of Chief Alvarez's footsteps, the way he moved with the careful economy of someone who'd learned to be invisible. You should eat, Alvarez said, setting down a bag that smelled of whatever passed for breakfast in this corner of Afghanistan. I should do a lot of things, Diana replied. Her voice was rough from breathing oxygen and screaming into a mask that captured sound but not fury. Eating isn't high on the list. The chief moved to stand beside her, looking out at the same mountains. SEAL Team 3 sends their regards, all 35 of them. They want you to know they're alive because of you. Diana's jaw tightened. They're alive because someone forgot to lock down an aircraft that should have been scrap metal, because you decided keeping faith was more important than following orders, because I'm too stubborn to stay dead. No, Alvarez said quietly. They're alive because when 35 men needed an angel, you answered. Everything else is just details. She finally turned to look at him. The chief had aged in 3 years, his hair gone more gray, his face carrying lines that hadn't been there when she'd last seen him before the crash that changed everything. They're going to come for me, for you. They can't let this stand. A dead woman stealing government property and flying unauthorized missions. It's a scandal waiting to explode. Let it explode. I'm 2 weeks from retirement that's already processed. What are they going to do? Take away birthday I've already chosen. Diana moved to the table, picking up the sidearm and checking it with the automatic precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. They can take away your pension, your benefits. They can make an example that ruins your family. Alvarez smiled, and it held a peace she envied. My family knows who I am. My wife knew what I was doing for the last 3 years. She's the one who suggested it, actually. Said you'd earned better than a bureaucracy that threw you away when you became inconvenient. Diana felt something in her chest loosen. Your wife knew. Emily's a retired Army nurse. She's seen enough heroes get discarded to recognize when the system needs a kick in the teeth. So yes, she knew. She helped, in fact. You think I kept that A-10 running alone? Some of those hydraulic seals required specialist knowledge I don't have. Diana laughed, and the sound surprised her. It had been 3 years since she'd laughed without bitterness coloring the sound. I've been in hiding for 3 years thinking I was alone. Turns out half the base's retired personnel were in on it. Not half, just the ones who remember what loyalty looks like. The chief pulled a chair over, settling into it with the careful movements of someone whose knees had logged too many hours on concrete. Diana, you've got a choice to make. General Crawford is giving you 48 hours to come involuntarily. After that, you're classified as unauthorized personnel. Diana turned the pistol over in her hands. It was a Beretta M9 standard issue with a serial number that had been filed off years ago. What happens if I come in? They debrief you, probably offer you a deal, reinstatement maybe, a chance to come back to the world officially. They might even apologize for leaving you buried when you were still alive. And if I don't, Alvarez's expression went sad, then you spend the rest of your life running. New identity, new life, always looking over your shoulder. You become what they already made you, a ghost. Except this time you won't have a purpose, just survival. Diana walked to the window, the pistol hanging loose in her hand. Below, the street moved with the morning rhythm of a city that had seen too many wars to be impressed by one more. Merchants opened stalls. Children ran toward schools. Life continued with the relentless determination of people who'd learned that stopping meant dying. I don't know if I can go back, she said quietly. The woman who flew that A-10 yesterday isn't the same one who crashed 3 years ago. That woman died in the Mediterranean. What came back is someone who understands that rules are just suggestions written by people who have never had to choose between right and regulation. Alvarez stood, moving to join her at the window. The woman who crashed 3 years ago would have followed orders, would have accepted being left for dead because that's what the mission required. The woman standing here now, she knows that sometimes the only way to honor the uniform is to take it off and do what needs doing anyway. Diana looked at him, this man who'd risked everything to keep faith with a pilot nobody wanted. Why'd you do it, Chief? Really? You had 2 years until retirement. You could have let me disappear. Instead, you spent 3 years maintaining an aircraft, covering tracks, keeping secrets that could have ended your career. Why? The chief's eyes went distant. I had a son, Matthew. He wanted to be a pilot just like you. Got into the academy, graduated top of his class. Flew F-16s. On his 3rd deployment, his aircraft took battle damage. He managed to keep it flying long enough to get over friendly territory before he ejected. He did everything right, followed every procedure, and when he landed, when he made contact, you know what he got? Diana felt ice form in her stomach. What? He got told to sit tight, that extraction was coming. And while he waited, while he believed in the system he'd served, enemy forces found him. They captured him, tortured him, eventually executed him. We found his body 3 months later. The chief's voice never wavered, but Diana saw his hands shake. After the funeral, after the speeches about honor and sacrifice, I accessed the mission reports. I found out that there had been an extraction bird available. It was 15 minutes away, but someone higher up decided the risk was too great, that losing one pilot wasn't worth potentially losing a helicopter and its crew. He turned to face her fully. So they left my son to die while they calculated acceptable losses. And I learned that sometimes the system we serve doesn't serve us back. That sometimes loyalty is a one-way street paved with the bodies of people who believed in the uniform more than the uniform believed in them. Diana felt tears threaten for the first time in 3 years. So when I reached out, so when you reached out, I saw a chance to make sure Matthew's sacrifice meant something. To prove that some of us still believe loyalty matters more than procedure. That when the system fails its best people, someone needs to stand up and say, not this time. They stood in silence, two people who'd learned that faith sometimes required breaking the rules written to protect it. Outside, the call to prayer echoed across the city, ancient words calling the faithful to remember purposes larger than themselves. I'll go in, Diana said finally. I'll face whatever comes, but on my terms. I'm not surrendering. I'm not apologizing. I'm walking in and telling them the truth, that they left me for dead, that I came back anyway, and that when 35 men needed saving, I didn't wait for authorization because authorization never saves anyone. Alvarez nodded slowly. They're going to try to make this about you violating orders, about theft and unauthorized use of military assets. Let them try. I'll remind them that the Air Force spent $6 million training me to be a weapon. They don't get to complain when the weapon does what it was built to do just because the trigger pull came at an inconvenient time. The chief pulled out a phone, the burner variety that couldn't be traced. I'll make the call, set up the meeting. But Diana, you need to be prepared. This isn't going to end with applause. Even if they don't prosecute, you're going to face people who see you as a problem instead of a solution. Diana chambered around in the Beretta, then carefully ejected it and set the weapon aside. I spent 3 years being dead. I spent 1,000 hours maintaining an aircraft that nobody wanted. And last night, I flew through weather that should have killed me to save men I'll never meet. I think I can handle some uncomfortable meetings. Alvarez smiled, and Diana saw pride in his expression. Your call sign was Ember because they said you'd burn out fast, fly too aggressive, take too many risks. You were supposed to be a shooting star, bright for a moment, then gone. And instead you're a wildfire that refuses to go out. You're the thing that scares them because you proved that everything they said was impossible was just them lacking imagination. He made the call, speaking in the clipped efficiency of military communication. When he hung up, his expression was grim. General Crawford will meet with you tomorrow at 600 hours. Neutral location, no security presence, just you and him. He's giving you the chance to tell your story before the bureaucracy takes over. Diana nodded. Then I better figure out what story I'm telling, because depending on who's listening, I'm either a hero or a ghost who should have stayed buried. She walked to the table where her flight suit lay discarded. The fabric was stained with hydraulic fluid and sweat, the seams frayed from years of use. But across the back, barely visible beneath the damage, was embroidered text that few people ever saw. KORCHNKO, Ember, a killer. Diana traced the letters with one finger. You know what the difference is between a hero and a ghost? What's that? Ghosts can't die twice. They've got nothing left to lose. So they do things heroes won't do because heroes still have reputations to protect. Alvarez picked up his own jacket, preparing to leave. Tomorrow at 600 hours, you stop being a ghost. You ready for that? Diana looked at the pistol, the flight suit, the window that showed a world that had kept turning while she'd been erased from it. She thought about 35 SEALs breathing air they shouldn't be breathing. She thought about a son who died waiting for rescue that never came. She thought about all the invisible people who kept the machine running while others took credit. "No," she said honestly. "But I'm going anyway, because that's what pilots do. We strap into aircraft knowing we might not come back. We fly into weather that wants to kill us. We engage enemies that outnumber us. And we do it because someone has to be willing to pay the price that freedom demands." She met his eyes. "Tomorrow I'm going to walk into that meeting and remind everyone what that price looks like when you're too stubborn to stay dead." The chief nodded once, sharp and final. Then he was gone, leaving Diana alone with her ghosts and her choices. The meeting point was a maintenance hangar on the edge of Bagram Airfield, the kind of place where broken things waited for decisions about their future. General Crawford stood beside an A-10 that wasn't Diana's bird. This one wore active service markings and the scars of recent missions. He looked exactly like his photographs, late 50s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen enough to stop being surprised. Diana walked in at precisely 600 hours, wearing a clean flight suit that Chief Alvarez had acquired through channels she didn't want to know about. Her hair was pulled back in the regulation bun she'd abandoned 3 years ago. Her hands were steady despite the weight of what came next. Crawford studied her for a long moment. "Captain Diana Korchenko, you're either the luckiest pilot I've ever met or the unluckiest. I haven't decided which." "Neither, sir. Just the most stubborn." A small smile touched Crawford's face. "Sit." He gestured toward two folding chairs that had been set up near the A-10's wing root. "We're going to have a conversation. No recording devices, no witnesses, just two people talking about choices and consequences." Diana sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. "With respect, sir, I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness." "Good, because I'm not authorized to give it." Crawford settled into his own chair with the careful movements of someone whose body carried old injuries. "I've read your service record. 17 combat deployments, 312 combat missions, 2 Silver Stars, 4 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and a Purple Heart you earned when you took shrapnel protecting a medevac extraction. By every measure, you were exactly the kind of pilot we build the Air Force around." He paused. "And then we threw you away." Diana felt her jaw tight. "Yes, sir, you did. The orders that kept you listed as KIA came from above my level. I want you to understand that. When I learned the truth, when I found out a pilot had survived and been told to stay dead for political convenience, I was 6 months into this posting. By then, the decision had been made and reinforced by people who didn't want to admit they'd chosen bureaucracy over a pilot's life." Crawford's voice carried something that might have been regret. "I'm not going to insult you by saying I would have done differently. I don't know what I would have done, but I can tell you that the decision to abandon you was wrong. Not just tactically wrong, but morally wrong. And you've earned the right to hear that from someone in uniform." Diana hadn't expected this. She prepared for accusations, for demands, for the bureaucratic grinding that turned soldiers into statistics. Instead, she was getting something that looked like accountability. "Why tell me this?" "Because in 12 hours this becomes official. Lawyers get involved. Investigators start asking questions. The media gets wind of a dead pilot who saved a SEAL team, and suddenly everyone's trying to control the narrative." "But before all that happens, I wanted you to hear the truth from me." Crawford leaned forward. "You violated every regulation in the book yesterday. Unauthorized takeoff, flying an unregistered aircraft, engaging in combat operations without clearance. By the letter of military law, you committed multiple offenses that could result in court-martial and imprisonment." Diana met his eyes. "And by the spirit of what we're supposed to be. By that measure, you did exactly what every pilot swears to do. You answered the call. You flew into impossible odds to protect Americans in contact. You succeeded when everyone else said success wasn't possible. And you came back alive, which is more than anyone had a right to expect." The general stood, moving to touch the A-10's scarred fuselage. "This aircraft, 80247, has a history that predates your time flying it. It's been shot down twice, or rather, shot down twice and refused to acknowledge it. It's brought home pilots who should have died. It's completed missions that existed only in classified files. He turned back. And now it's become the symbol of a question the Air Force has to answer. Do we serve the rules or do we serve the mission? Diana rose. With respect, sir, that's a false choice. Rules exist to serve the mission. When they don't, they're not rules anymore. They're obstacles. Crawford's smile held approval. That's the answer I hoped you'd give. Because here's what's going to happen, Captain Korchenko. You're going to be reinstated. Full rank, full back pay, full recognition of your survival and service. The paperwork that declared you dead will be corrected. The orders that told you to stay buried will be investigated by people with enough authority to make the authors uncomfortable. Diana felt the floor tilt. Sir, you're getting your life back, Captain, not as a favor, as a correction of an injustice that should never have happened. Chief Master Sergeant Alvarez will receive a letter of reprimand for unauthorized maintenance activities, a letter that will be buried so deep in his file that it'll never affect his retirement. And the 35 men you saved will get the truth about who saved them. Diana's voice came out harder than intended. And the cost? The cost is that you become a symbol. The Air Force is going to announce your survival and reinstatement. We're going to tell the story of a pilot who was left for dead and came back to save lives. We're going to use you to recruit, to inspire, to remind people why they serve. Crawford's expression went serious. You'll be famous, Captain. Your privacy ends today. Your story becomes public property. And you'll spend the rest of your career giving speeches, shaking hands, and being the face of American determination. That's the price of resurrection. Diana thought about 3 years of hiding, 3 years of being invisible, maintaining an aircraft in the dark, living with ghosts. Then she thought about 35 SEALs going home to families they shouldn't have seen again. I can live with fame if it means something, but I've got conditions. Crawford raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating. I'm clarifying expectations. I'll be your symbol, I'll give your speeches. But when men need saving and the weather's bad and the odds are impossible, I'm getting wheels up. No delays, no clearance checks. You point me at the problem, I solve it. That's the deal. The general studied her for a long moment. You're asking for carte blanche to launch whenever you deem necessary. I'm asking for what I've already proven I'll take anyway. You can give it officially and maintain the illusion of control, or I can keep operating in the shadows. Either way, men who need air support are getting it. Crawford laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. You know what the Pentagon's going to call that? They're going to call it the Ember Protocol. Special authorization for time-sensitive close air support operations when conventional authorization timelines are impractical. You'll have limits, oversight, accountability. But within those bounds, you'll have what you're asking for. He extended his hand. Do we have an understanding, Captain? Diana took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of a general who'd come up through the ranks doing actual work. Yes, sir, we do, but sir. Yes. That A-10 I flew yesterday, it stays mine. I don't care what the regulations say about pilot aircraft assignments. That bird and I have an understanding. We keep each other alive. I'm not flying anything else. Crawford's smile turned knowing. The Revenant officially doesn't exist, Captain. It's in the boneyard at Davis-Monthan. Has been for 2 years, according to every official record. So how could I possibly assign you to an aircraft that isn't real? Diana felt herself smile for the first time since she'd walked into this hangar. Understood, sir. Good. Now in approximately 4 hours, you're going to be surrounded by public affairs officers who want to manage your message. You're going to be asked to give interviews to soften edges, to make this story palatable for audiences that don't understand what combat actually looks like. Crawford's voice dropped. Ignore them. Tell the truth. Tell them what it felt like to be left for dead. Tell them what it cost Chief Alvarez to keep faith. Tell them that 35 families have husbands and fathers and sons because someone decided rules were negotiable but lives weren't. Diana nodded. And when they ask why I did it, tell them you're a pilot. That's all the explanation anyone needs. The general turned toward the hangar door where morning light was beginning to stream in. Captain Korchenko, you've been dead for 3 years. In a few hours, you're going to be reborn as a symbol, a hero, a recruiting poster. But before all that happens, I want you to know something. Sir, You're the kind of pilot legends are built around, the kind that people tell stories about decades after the war's end, and the Air Force failed you when you needed us most. That's a debt I can't repay. All I can do is make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. Diana felt emotion threaten to break through the control she'd maintained for 3 years. General Crawford, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think they'll understand, the people who read about this, who see the news stories? Do you think they'll understand what it costs to come back from being dead? What it means to spend 3 years invisible, maintaining purpose through work nobody sees? Crawford was quiet for a long moment. No, most won't. They'll see the heroism but miss the price. They'll celebrate the rescue but forget the abandonment. That's the nature of symbols, Captain. They're simplified for consumption. He met her eyes. But the 35 men you saved will understand. Their families will understand. And every pilot who's ever flown into bad weather knowing the mission mattered more than survival will understand. That's your real audience, not the public, the people who serve. Diana came to attention, her salute sharp and precise despite 3 years without practice. Crawford returned it, and in that moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with respect. Welcome back from the dead, Captain Korchenko. Now go get ready to face a world that thought you were gone. Diana turned and walked out into the Afghan morning, where the sun was rising over mountains she'd threaded in darkness. Above her, an A-10 was taking off, its twin engines howling their defiance at gravity and fate. She thought about Chief Alvarez, about his son who died waiting for a rescue that never came. She thought about 35 SEALs who'd been given another chance at life. She thought about all the invisible people who kept the machine running while others took credit. And she thought about herself, Diana Korchenko, call sign Ember, the pilot who'd refused to stay dead because some things mattered more than regulations. The press conference would come. The interviews would follow. The fame she'd never wanted would arrive whether she was ready or not. But for now, in this moment between resurrection and revelation, she was just a pilot standing on a tarmac watching aircraft do what they were built to do. Behind her, in a hangar that smelled of oil and history, an A-10 that officially didn't exist waited for its next impossible mission. And somewhere in America, 35 families were waking up to phone calls that said their husbands, fathers, and sons were coming home alive. That was enough. That was everything. That was why people like Diana Korchenko put on the uniform and flew into skis that wanted them dead. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because when someone needed saving, someone had to answer, even if that someone was supposed to be dead.